Hi everyone, I'm Craig from Grow Paradise, and in this video we are back in Abbotsbury Subtropical Gardens on Dorset's Jurassic coast. Now it's a lovely mild March day. There's a bit of coastal fog hanging around, it's making it feel a bit like a cloud forest, and I'm here to find David, the curator, and he's going to give us a walk around to show us some of the garden highlights at this time of year. Now it's March, it's been quite mild and quite wet, so it'll be really interesting to see how the plants in this subtropical woodland garden are holding up. Now, I've got a feeling he's going to show us some shrubs, maybe some ground cover plants and some rare, beautiful climbing plants, as well as the odd, weird and wonderful plant, which I know I love and I love to share with you. So come along with me, we'll find David and we'll have a look around the gardens at this time of year. Ah, there's David. Hi David, how are you doing?
Good morning, Craig.
It has been a very wet and mild March, hasn't it? How are the gardens holding up?
They're wet. Saturated is probably the word. We're just starting to see the springs that have all emerged dry up slightly. So hoping to get our lawns back shortly and some of the gravel back in the paths where it should be. But it's been immensely wet and, well, so far we don't seem to have too many casualties, but a lot of our plants, the wet can be curtains for them.
Okay, well,
wet and cold combined.
Fingers crossed we get some dry weather soon. This shrub you're stood next to, this is looking really nice at this time of year. Which one's this?
So this is a Viburnum facratum, and I'm sure your viewers will be familiar with Viburnums. It's such a variable genus that varies from plants that are used as car park plants. We've even got a native Viburnum.
Okay.
The Guelder Rose.
Oh yeah.
And Viburnum spread across a lot of the world actually, and they're quite variable within that. You go from tiny prostrate shrubs all the way up to giant great trees, deciduous evergreen. There's the whole kind of variety, so we really shouldn't rule these out just because they're kind of used occasionally as car park plants.
No, that's very true. There's some really nice foliage ones as well with corrugated kind of textured leaves that I think I've seen a few people growing in tropical style gardens, but this one I think definitely is a favourite of mine.
Yes. So it might at first look a bit kind of cottagey and flowery, but this is very much what it does in spring. And it is quite pretty, it really does light up a woodland garden. But then as it goes on, you have these really quite gorgeous, leathery, felty leaves, which will get quite big for a Viburnum.
Yep.
Nice big sort of kind of ovate to cordate almost leaves. And then it goes through to the autumn when it has the most amazing autumn colour. Probably in my eyes, one of the best autumn colour trees. And I've seen them be completely bright, vivid purple.
Yeah, they really do stand out, especially amongst evergreens like you've got mixed in this bed, like the rhododendron behind. This is just going to look ablaze in autumn, isn't it?
Yes. So this plant is actually really quite shade tolerant, and here it's growing underneath an evergreen oak. That's an evergreen canopy cover that excludes most of the light through basically the entire year. So what that means is we've got really dry, shady soil under here. And it does just fine. It's flowering perfectly well. It's become quite a nice tall shrub. It's not drawn up too much. It's got a nice habit to it. And this will have perfectly good autumn colour, even in the shade.
Okay, and I guess where it's planted at the base of so many large trees, come summer this soil must get quite dry?
Yes, yeah, very much so.
Okay.
So pretty much everything around it struggles to grow.
Okay, and this one's thriving?
Yes,
Okay,
so it does really well, but we've got quite a few of these around.
Yeah.
So I think it's more of a testament to its resilience.
Okay, yeah.
And how it will really deal with quite a few different situations.
Yeah, and dry shade is always a problematic planting spot, so perhaps try one of these if you've got those conditions in your garden.
It's also worth mentioning that it's actually quite a slow growing Viburnum. This plant was planted in 2004, and it was a decent sized plant when it went in. So that's really quite a slow growing shrub, which is probably a good thing, because for the vast majority of small gardens, we don't want these absolutely massive trees that will become a problem. This plant is naturally quite stout.
Quite well behaved.
Yes, yes, and it really they don't get too much bigger than this.
No, that's good. It's definitely one I'd like to try in my garden, and completely hardy, obviously, as well.
Yes, yeah, completely hardy. I've seen them growing through most of the British Isles very happily.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing this one.
So over here we have Rhododendron Macabianum, and I mean it's just a wonderful plant. It's just started to flower really well. Some of these have been out for a couple of weeks or so. This particular one has just come out into its highlight of its bloom.
Yeah.
And you can see basically every stem has one of these absolutely ridiculous inflorescences on the end.
Yeah, it is absolutely covered all the way to the top of the plant, and they are huge.
Yes, it's renowned for being one of the most beautiful rhododendrons, and certainly one of the most beautiful large leaf rhododendrons.
Yes.
Because we put this in that category alongside some of those really big large leaf rhododendrons, some of which can have leaves that sort of size.
Okay, so these leaves are relatively small compared to what this plant can reach.
Yes, yes. So this one, if it was really happy and it had a nice moist site and it wasn't quite as old and spindly a specimen as this one, they can have leaves that are 2-3 times that size.
Okay, that's an impressive plant. So ideal conditions is moist soil, partial shade, and acidic soil?
Yes, yep. So typical for rhododendrons and most Ericaceae in general is to have either neutral or acidic soil. We are quite a neutral sandy soil here, so that is good for that aspect. It needs to be quite wet. It comes from northeastern India at quite high altitudes, but even though it's from India, it's actually quite a high rainfall area of India up in the Himalayas.
Yep.
So it does get quite a lot of rain. It is quite wet through most of the year, so when we're growing it, we need to make sure it doesn't dry out in the summer too much.
Okay.
And that's part of the problem that's happened with this, is the leaves have gone this small. Doesn't relatively have that many leaves on this plant. It's a very old specimen. This could be 50, 60 years old.
Yeah.
And what that means is it's suffered a bit. So it's really trying to kind of reduce its area that it needs to transpire from.
Yep.
To kind of limit how much water it loses in the dry conditions. And I mean, it's just hanging on, really.
It is.
This plant.
But for a plant that's hanging on, it's still really, really spectacular. I just can't get over the size of these blooms.
It is a completely bonkers plant. And when you look at the flower colour in contrast to this lovely dark glossy green leaf top and the indumentum underneath, it just makes it one of the most all-round, ornamental, exotic shrubs.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing this one.
Just down here is a plant that it doesn't really look that at home, I would say. It almost looks alien here on the floor of the forest canopy. But this is Pachyssandra procumbens, and it comes all the way from the eastern side of the USA.
Okay.
Where it grows in quite damp woodlands with, well, not too much shade, dappled shade, and quite a lot of water running through the soil, so it doesn't dry out too much. But typically for British cultivation, it's pretty tolerant of woodland conditions. And this particular plant is technically a shrub, sometimes behaving as a herbaceous perennial, but it sprawls. It is procumbent, hence the specific epithet.
Yeah.
And this plant, you can kind of see it. It pushes out these stems, goes along the ground, and then it roots into the ground. And that way it forms this wonderful mat of quite nice foliage.
Is it evergreen foliage?
Evergreen foliage.
Yep.
Evergreen foliage. But then in spring, it has this wonderful flower, inflorescence, that looks almost like an orchid.
It does. It really caught my eye as we were walking past.
So it might not always be possible for us to grow great big dactylorhiza in our gardens because they're a nightmare. So we can grow things like this that just add such a pop of colour.
Yeah.
Such a weird flower that it just catches our eye. And that's another dimension.
And
it draws us down there.
Sometimes the small flowers make you pause and appreciate a plant a lot more than something that's big and in your face as you walk past. And I mean, this is a really good contrast to that rhododendron we just looked at.
Yes.
If you combine the two, then you've got the best of both worlds in your garden.
Yes, they really are chalk and cheese. And I mean, it's a shame it's not underneath the rhododendron. It would be very happy in the conditions created by that rhododendron. But it is really different. And that contrast is what we're trying to create. By creating that contrast, we are emphasising the best characteristics of both.
Yeah, that's a nice way of doing it. I think a lot of people with small spaces tend to cram them full of small plants, and then you just lose kind of the benefits of each plant, don't you? You need something big in a small space to showcase the small details. And sometimes it even makes a small space feel much bigger, wouldn't you say?
And equally, I think the other way around is just as appropriate.
Very true.
Sometimes we go too big and we have everything big and suddenly you lose the scale.
Yeah.
And I get that sometimes here, where we have such a big garden, some of the biggest trees in the country, and all these massive leaves, you lose the sense of scale. A plant like this is almost like, it's like a ruler. It's just able to bring you back down to kind of normal scale.
I think an experience that many plant lovers will have where scale has sort of been skewed for them is when you buy a plant in a plant shop that looks a sensible size and then you get it home and it's absolutely enormous. But in the shop it looked fine. When you get it back it feels huge, and it just shows how everything is relative. And like you say, combining a small flowering plant like this is just going to showcase something like the huge leaves of the woodwardia behind it, or something like the rhododendron we've just spoken about. Yeah, play with scale in your gardens.
Up here, we've got a plant that is just coming into flower, and it's an orcuba.
Okay.
So, orcuba, we're much more familiar with orcuba as these plants that, well, I mean, to describe them, I'd say probably puke-like is the most apt description for some of the orcubas that are around.
Yeah.
But they typically have these blotchy leaves, and then they're not really my thing. But that doesn't mean we rule them out entirely as a genus, because there are orcubas out there that are absolutely splendid, and we have a few of them in this garden. And certainly one of the most splendid is this one, which is Orcuba omiensis.
Okay.
And this particular well, in fact, Orcuba omiensis in general has all come from one collection that was made by Roy Lancaster in the 80s from a mountain, Mount Omay rather. And this plant came from Roy in the 90s, and it's getting to quite significant proportions.
Yeah, it's a really good size. And I love how glossy and large the leaves are on this one. They seem much more exotic or tropical style than your standard Orcuba plants that, like you say, you see quite commonly in gardens. This one is a real standout plant.
Yes, it's really glossy, really beautiful. It's actually, it probably grows better than most of your typical Orcubas, which do tend to, they just have a lot of problems. I've had a lot of problems with your typical spotty Orcubas.
Yeah.
But this one's quite tolerant. It will deal with quite a bit of shade. In fact, it likes quite a bit of shade. Roy's plant grows on the north side of his house, so it's really good for a north-facing wall.
Yep, I'm guessing quite cold tolerant then if it's on the north side?
Yes, yeah, relatively cold tolerant. I don't think it's really been trialled that extensively, but
Okay.
I haven't heard of too many accounts of it dying in the cold. And in fact, it comes from an area that does get quite cold.
Yeah.
So I expect it will probably be fairly cold tolerant. And it's got these wonderful flowers at this time of year. So these are, they're all males actually. All the plants that are in cultivation in this country are males. And that is possibly the only letdown, is that we don't get any berries.
Okay, so you need both a male and a female plant to get the berries on these?
Yes, so these are what we call dioecious, which means that we have separate male and female plants, a bit like hollies and yews and ginkgos. So you need to have both a male and a female to set fruit. But because this is so new into cultivation and there's only been one collection, we have only male plants in cultivation.
Okay, but the flowers are nice. Now that weird looking trunk in front of it, that doesn't belong to the Orba, does it?
No, so this, sadly, if it did, it would be amazing. But this is a Calapanix septemlobus. So this plant comes from Eastern Asia.
Yeah.
And it is quite bizarrely in a Raeliaceae. So I mean, many of our amazing Raeliaceae around the garden that we've been looking at, even
the Schefflerers.
the Schlefferers,
Yeah,
precisely. So, but it's completely different to a lot of those Raeliaceae. It has these wonderful spiny kind of nodules on its bark that are quite obnoxious actually. You can do some damage on those, and it bulks out quite quickly. This was planted in 2002.
Okay.
So it's a fairly fast growing tree. You can get something with quite vicious looking spines in a short amount of time.
Yeah.
And on top of that wonderful bark, it becomes quite a nice tree. It's got quite nice Raeliaceae cut foliage and some quite nice flowers and fruits as well.
Yeah.
So it's a really well-rounded tree.
Yeah, I really like plants like this that have interesting bark or textures come this time of year, because although they're not in leaf, it's still really eye-catching, and I'm sure everyone that passes this tree when they're visiting the gardens stops to try and inspect what it is.
And it's a really good example of a technique of planting design that we're using here to make it feel more tropical and exotic, but in a way that's more than just the obvious ways, like having great big leaves and exotic foliage. So when you're in the tropics, an awful lot of trunks of the trees will be covered in spines.
Okay.
And there are a few traits that you link with plants in the tropics, and this is certainly one of them. And so much so that there aren't really many plants for temperate UK cultivation that have trunks like this. But this one has been planted, well, and we have specimens of these all around the garden for this effect.
Yeah, I mean, it's really successful. It looks great, pushing up through those evergreen leaves and up into the canopy. I really do feel transported into far-flung locations.
So similar to the Pachyssandra that we were just looking at, this plant also comes from the eastern side of the United States of America. And this is Zanforisa simplicissima, which is quite a small growing shrub. It's really at home in woodland conditions where it gets a fair amount of moisture, not too much, and dappled shade. And then when it's happy, it will slowly spread, creating a suckering shrub that gets to about 4 or 5 foot tall. And then it produces these quite bizarre, very easy to miss flowers.
I was going to say I would have walked past this, but as soon as you pointed it out, I'm interested. I want to know more. It's so odd.
Well, I'm gonna reveal something to your viewers that we did actually walk past it and we had to come back anyway.
No, don't tell them that.
So break the secret on that one, because it's so inconspicuous.
Yeah.
But when you really tune your eye in, it's quite gorgeous. And this is a plant that's been introduced. It's been in this country since sort of 18th century, in one form or another, but it never really took off in horticulture and in mainstream growing. So it's been preserved in collections like ours.
Yeah.
But it never really kind of took off. But I think it should. I think it should. Maybe now is its time.
Yeah. Go and buy one.
Go and buy one of these. Because
what's its foliage
gorgeous.
like?
Well, it's really nice. It's got really, really gorgeous foliage that turns the most amazing red in autumn. So it does bring a lot of ornamental aspect over a long season, and it really doesn't overimpose itself.
Okay.
It's quite compact. It's generally doesn't get in the way. It will deal with shade, so it's perfect for a garden like this. And it creates a nice suckering shrub, which is something I'm very keen on. I quite like suckering shrubs, provided they don't sucker too much.
Yes, yeah, not popping up, not behaving a bit like bamboo and popping up far away from the main plant.
Yes.
If it stays in almost like a clump that's slowly establishing.
Yes. I think you've a bit like bamboo. You do get thugs that will try and take over your entire garden if you're not careful.
Yeah.
And then you get plants that occasionally throw out a new stem or two.
Yeah.
But what you get is when they do that well, is you get kind of ornamental effect of all these wonderful branches coming out in a very naturalistic way, doing their own thing. And for me, it's kind of a pinnacle of naturalistic planting design.
Yes, yeah.
I'm trying to make things look as natural as we can, like we are here at Abbotsbury.
Yeah, if you can get plants that sort of self-propagate in and around themselves, it's going to not look like it's just landed there. And I guess, like the plant you've got at the base of it, the saxifraga, sometimes called strawberry begonia, which people might be surprised is hardy because it's so often sold as a houseplant, is another plant that does just that. It self-propagates and slowly spreads around.
Yes, so really, I mean, there's an awful lot of plants in the garden here that we just gently give them some encouragement. And they often put themselves where they want to be. They often grow as they would in the wild. And that really is the key. We're not over gardening. We're not trying to force things into places they don't want to be. And plants will often sort themselves out. A plant like this, if it's in the wrong spot, it will slowly move towards where it wants to be.
Yeah. Yeah, you've got to follow their lead, I guess, and kind of relinquish control and let the plants show you what they want and when they need changes.
So just at the base of this towering oak tree, we have an iris, believe it or not. This is Iris confusa, Martin Rix, and it's named confusa because of how completely confusing the stems and leaves of this plant are.
I mean, it looks super, super exotic. Is this completely hardy?
So it's one that needs a bit of shelter, but it's hardy-ish.
Okay.
And if you stick it in a nice shady spot, maybe even north face of a wall, it should survive in the vast majority of the British Isles, I would say.
That's good to know.
But this particular plant, the cultivar Martin Rix, is a fine form of the species.
Yeah.
It's been selected for these quite gorgeous blue flowers. And I really just wanted to look at this because it changes our conception of plants, and just because it's an iris doesn't mean that it has to be in a cottage garden or has to be in kind of Sarah Raven's flowers. It's so exotic and beautiful, and it has these amazing foliage and stems. And it's just so jungly and tropical and exotic.
Yeah.
I think this should be in every exotic garden.
I completely agree with you. Like, we're doing a March tour of Abbotsbury Subtropical Gardens, and to have flowers that look this exotic and foliage that looks this exotic at this time of year, when a lot of it is kind of shrubs doing their thing, this is a real, I'd say, a real standout, and I'm definitely going to be looking to add it to the Grow Paradise garden for sure. Thank you, Abbotsbury, for the inspiration.
Yes. So this is, I mean, it grows quite tall, but it's really quite at home in shade. And these leaves do behave as evergreens, so they will stay nice and green and lush all the way through the winter. And then they'll push out these leaves, push out these flowers rather, which will then continue for the next couple of weeks in a slow succession, going up. And then these ones will all push out, these new stems. Push out to add to these. So it will bulk up. It's fairly quick to propagate. You can divide it like most herbaceous perennials. And soon you could have quite a few of these sort of clumps in your Grow Paradise garden. So we've come over the other side of the garden, up into our Australasian garden, where we have a south-facing aspect and a lot of sun, really, not too much canopy cover. And that allows us to grow a lot of those Australasian, so Australian, New Zealand plants in particular.
Yeah.
It's also particularly good for Chilean plants up here. But that sunny aspect combined with this quite nice shallow soil, free draining, acidic, just makes it perfect for many of those Australasian plants. And in this bed we have a clematis paniculata. And this comes from the woodlands of New Zealand, where it's of special cultural significance to the Maori, actually, because they use it as a harbinger of spring. When they use the flower of this plant to indicate when the fishing season starts. So the harvest of eels and other fish are often marked by this coming out in flower.
I mean, it's pretty accurate. Didn't British springtime start yesterday, officially?
Yes.
And here it is out in full bloom, so I can see why they used it.
So meteorological spring yesterday, I came out, I thought it must be out. And it was. It looked like it was the first day it's been out, and it's just amazing.
Yeah.
It does it every year. It's pretty much bang on spring. So for me, this is kind of the start of Abbotsbury spring. It's potential that the Camellia campbellii, if I'm feeling really optimistic, might be the start of spring. But this is true spring.
Yeah.
And it's just gorgeous. It's the specific epithet paniculata means panicle. So we have these wonderful panicles in which the flowers are arranged, and that gives it just an amazing feeling of being dripping with flowers.
Yeah, that's a really good descriptive word for this, because as it's scrambling through the shrubs in this bed, it really is, dripping in flowers, and it's really nice foliage on this clematis as well. Is it an evergreen species?
Yes, so it's an evergreen species, and so it holds onto these leaves through the year. They tend to kind of blend into the rest of the foliage later on, but it doesn't kind of leave a bare twig like some of the winter flowering clematis do, which means it's really useful. It's a really useful plant. And I think also a really good thing about this plant is there's not too much foliage. Often clematis can be just overwhelmed with foliage, and you can end up with a mass of kind of stuff that just smothers plants around it. If you're growing it over something else, it won't be very happy with it.
Yeah, yeah.
And this one just has that really nice fine balance going on.
I really, really like it. And I can see that it's scrambling through a couple of plants here, and it's heading up into that acacia in the bed that's in full bloom as well. Which acacia is that?
Yeah, so the acacia, this is Acacia Melanoxyon, which is an Australian native.
Okay.
And it's fairly hardy, certainly worth trying if you're in the south of England.
Yeah.
Certainly does very well down in Cornwall and the West Country. But it will get a lot bigger actually. It becomes quite a big tree, flowers at the same time as the clematis, so it's quite a lovely combination.
Yes.
We are in the process of trying to gently encourage the clematis to go up the tree.
Okay, that will be really nice. I mean, to have both plants in full flower at this time of year will be beautiful. And it's really atmospheric in the gardens today. As I'm panning up, you can see the coastal fog that we've got lingering. It feels a bit like a cloud forest, which is beautiful.
It's possibly when the garden's at its best, when it's a bit cloudy, tropical and atmospheric,
Yeah.
very un-British.
Yes, I really like coming to the gardens when it's slightly wetter, because the plants, for that subtropical look, when they're dripping in rainwater and the sound of the canopy with the rain just making its way down to the forest floor, it's really, really magical. It's unlike other gardens in rain. So for this time of year, with the unpredictable British weather, I'd say it's definitely worth a visit. Well, thank you so much for showing us around in March, David. It's been fantastic, and I've learned once again some more plants that I desperately want to add to my garden. That iris was really, really beautiful. Will you have us back again next month? Because I'd love to see how the gardens progress, and hopefully things dry out and the sun comes out a bit more.
Yes, I think we're going to have so much out in flower within the next month that I think the difficulty will be finding a selection of plants and not going too crazy and spending days on end looking at plants, because I'm sure you'll back me up by saying that you almost had to handcuff me just to look at these ones, otherwise we'd still be going by sort of 8 o'clock this evening.
There is so much to choose from. We'll try and split it up over several videos, and we'll keep sharing it with the audience. Hopefully you've enjoyed this look around the garden with David. I certainly have. There are plants there that I have walked past so many times and never recognised or given the time to appreciate. And as always, when I make these videos, I'm going out and speaking to other growers, seeing other kind of selections of plants, and it always makes that shopping list 1 or 2 plants longer. So hopefully it's inspired you with some plants that you can add to your garden, and perhaps you'd want to pay Abbotsbury Gardens a visit. I'll put a link to their website in the description of this video, and by all means, year round, these gardens look fantastic, so come and have a look. Now, if you love tropical style plants, don't forget, Grow Paradise has a UK plant and seed shop, as well as a growers forum, a social network for our worldwide community. So if you love growing plants like this, then go and sign up at www.growparadise.social. It's completely free, and we are all sharing pictures and just helping each other out, just sharing our passion for these plants. Now, thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, hit that subscribe button, and I will see you all in the next one.